As y'all have heard me say before, the most important part of planning any adventure are the snacks. And if you're looking for a delicious and nutritious snack that packs a real protein punch, crack into a good source of protein with tasty, healthy, wonderful pistachios. Each 1 ounce serving of wonderful pistachios contains 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value in that one serving. It's one of the highest protein nuts out there. And that's not all. Pistachios are also known for the fiber and better for you unsaturated fats, which may help keep you feeling fuller longer. Best part, wonderful pistachios come in a variety of flavors and sizes. Perfect for enjoying with your family and friends or taking them with you on your summer adventures for those snacks we're talking about. So whether you're dropping off the kiddos or running between meetings or about to climb a mountain, fuel up with a healthy and tasty snack. Wonderful Pistachios will be your new go-to. You can check them out at wonderfulpistachios.com and learn more about how these little green wonders can power up your day. Hey folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. I'm getting this episode up a little late, mostly because of Christmas. I just took the time off to be with family. And this episode's really special because this story with Quinn Brett was, I was very close to it at the time. Not very close, but I was around when this happened and remember it vividly when the news came out. And so I tell that story at the beginning of the episode. But yeah, I hope y'all had a wonderful Christmas. And I'm excited about the new year. This is our last new episode of the year. And the next one's going to be starting our 2024 catalog. When I go through all the names that we had on this year, it's a pretty amazing group of people and set of stories that we were able to tell this year. So thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, please share this show with somebody that hasn't listened before. And if you want to support us financially, go to patreon.com. Thank you, Fraser Bunton, who just bumped up their Patreon support from $1 to $5 a month. That's a huge boost that covers our expenses for the show. It's the financial foundation of this whole show is Patreon. And going back to today's story with Quinn, it's an amazing story. Please follow along. She just had a film come out. All that can be found in the show notes. And it's a very inspiring story about overcoming obstacles. I know a lot of our stories have that theme, but this one's a very tangible, very a powerful example of that. So without further ado, let's jump in. All right, folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. You heard a little of Quinn's story, but now we're going to welcome Quinn to the show. Welcome. How you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you.
Good. So how I found out about your story, crazy enough, was I was taking a wilderness first responder course, like the 10-day course, the long one, in Estes Park in 2017. And one of the instructors, Adam Baxter, came in to class like on the second or third day. I can't remember. It was like we had already taken a day or two, and he was just so down. So, he didn't, leave us guessing. The first thing he said was one of my good friends and fellow Rocky Mountain National Park ranger and whatnot that took a pretty major fall in Yosemite. And he was in tears. It was like very somber. It was snowing outside, and I was like, that was the first I'd ever heard of you, and that was right when it happened. But we didn't know the outcome because it was just all happening right then. And pretty wild full circle to be able to talk to you now. Gosh, 6 years later. Welcome to the show. He really cared, and I know the whole community did, and I know you've talked about that a lot, the response of the community. So it's amazing to have you on now.
Now you bring tears, man. Yeah, I love that man.
Definitely changed the way we approached the course too. Like it put a totally different perspective of like, not only are these things hypothetical that can happen, but like it just happened. not just to anybody either, to someone who is usually on the other end of that spectrum, you know? So
Yeah.
it was really crazy context that it put it all in. So anyway, I just wanted to share that before we get going. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you cry. I'll try not to do that again.
Oh, it'll happen again. Don't worry, I'm gonna cry.
Oh, well, where are you coming from today? And is that
Uh,
home?
yeah, so I am back home and just that town that you just mentioned, Estes Park, Colorado. That's where I still live most of the time.
And so I know you grew up in like a super adventurous family, but tell us quickly like your story because it started in Minnesota, and just like overview of kind of childhood you had, kind of family you grew up in, and then what kind of were some of those steps that led you to this beautiful mountain oasis.
Well, yeah, so grew up in Minnesota, have an older brother, and had on my dad's side a lot of boy cousins, and we shared a cabin with my dad and my aunt, my two aunts, and all of those boys. And so just grew up playing in that cabin a lot. And that's the side of the family, or I guess that's the side of the world that I preferred to be in, was the outside side. So played outside, fishing and hunting and roaming in the backyard. And then my dad also carried on his family tradition of taking us to national parks every summer, my brother and I. And so from first grade until I graduated high school, I pretty much visited most national parks or monuments west of the Mississippi by the time I graduated high school. Um, and throughout that, like, of course, you started hiking and then you started backpacking. And we had our first time putting an external framed backpack on me and sleeping bag and all this was here in Rocky Mountain National Park. I think it was in seventh grade or something.
Wow.
And then arrived at Yosemite by the time I was in high school. And by then had been intrigued about rock climbing. And as soon as I graduated college, was like beelined it out here to Estes Park, Colorado.
In those early trips with your family, was there a place that you really connected with, or a place that maybe opened your eyes to what was out west?
All of it. Like it was just exploring. I mean, like we did Harney's Peak. Like one of the first things I did when I was like 5 or 6 was Harney's Peak in, where is that, South Dakota. Um, so just going to all these different places every summer and get to explore and see them all. And I don't know, then it turned me on to just being outdoors in general.
Was it hard to go back home to Minnesota, or did it teach you kind of to see that place even as different?
No, it never felt hard because like I don't know, I grew up in the suburb, but we had a lake nearby, a pond as we called it, and then we had our cabin in the north, and like we'd go spend stretches there. And
That's
I mean,
awesome.
my parents were great in that, in the era of the times anyway. After school, it was just kind of like do whatever you want after school, be home at 5:30, and if you're not home at 5:30, like you're gonna get grounded. So most of the time we're home at 5:30, and they don't, like there was no cell phones, there was no checking tabs on us, like where we were. Like school finished at 2:30, and just get your ass home at 5:30, and then we'll have dinner, and then again come back. You can go out and play again and be home at 9:30, like whenever it's dark. And so for me, that's just where I would be spending all my time. I was like outside. So coming back to Minnesota wasn't a big deal because just go play outside some more.
And you eventually ended up in Estes. Why Estes over some of the other climbing hubs?
Well, so I wasn't like, I had done some climbing in high school, right? And done like climbed at Taylor's Falls, Minnesota, and Lake Superior, and the climbing gym in Minneapolis at the time. There's two, there's Vertical Endeavors, and then there was one right on the University of Minnesota campus, like a bouldering gym. But I worked at a coffee shop in college, and the very first day I worked there, this girl who had already worked there, I started telling her the story of like, well, my parents are moving to Arizona, so I don't know where I'm going to go this summer for the summer in college. And she's like, oh, I worked at this summer camp in Estes Park, Colorado. And she printed me up the application right there. And so I just filled it out and submitted it and had an interview, got hired, and came to Estes Park, Colorado because this girl, Erin, who's a very good friend still, who now lives in Fort Collins, printed up that application. And so that's what landed me here.
It is wild when you start retracing like the things that change our life. People have no clue just how the trajectories change. So you fell in love with the area, sounds like, and climbing itself, and started doing bigger and bigger experiences all throughout Zion and the Mountain West and all that. How familiar familiar were you with the climbing in Yosemite? I know you've done Half Dome and some other routes, but
Yeah, I'm not so familiar. Like when I was that first trip there when I was probably like 13, I told my dad I wanted to climb El Cap one day, but I
wow,
hadn't climbed there until so I moved here permanently here in Estes Park, Colorado. I moved here in my early 20s. Um, yeah, and then mountain biking was a bigger sport for me just because it was easier to access. But then once living here for longer and having, I'm surrounded by Tommy Caldwell and Josh Wharton and Paige Clausen. Like I was surrounded by these incredible climbers and people pushing the limits. So just kind of, and people who like to rock climb. So I guess I started gravitating towards rock climbing more. But I didn't visit Yosemite until, golly, I was like 27 or 28 as a rock climber, which is late. And I was familiar with it that by then I was like full on into rock climbing and knew and like I climbed El Cap that first trip. And I think my partner and I climbed 28 days straight in a row because I was just like so jazzed.
dang. Well, 27, 28 at seeing Yosemite. That's when John Muir first saw it. So
Ah,
it's kind of interesting. I'd consider that late, but he had a pretty major impact on the area. So,
yeah.
all in due time, right? So tell us about the objective in 2017 when you were in Yosemite before, when your injury happened. What was the goal? You were trying to do this. You're going for an FKT, right?
That wasn't specifically the goal of the day. The greater arching goal was I really wanted to climb what's called the triple. I'm gonna get it wrong. It's the triple Lindy because we have a trip. There is the Triple Crown. We have one here in Rocky Mountain National Park that we call the Triple Lindy, and the other one is the Triple Crown. But at any rate, it's climbing. Yes, it's climbing Half Dome, Mount Watkins, and El Cap in a day. And there
Wow.
was no female team that had done that yet. And so it took a couple of years. I had finally rounded up a partner. A few gal pals said no, and I finally rounded up my partner, Josie McKee, and she said yes. And so the intentions were, hey, we need to get our times pretty consistent in order to get it like I was thinking we might do it in a push, like maybe we won't do all 3 climbs in 24 hours, but maybe we do it in 30 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be jazzed with that. But if we wanted to try to get to the 24-hour mark, then we needed to climb El Capitan in under 6 hours. And so our intentions were the day that I was climbing we knew that we were pretty good at it. Like I'd climbed it in 7.5 hours with my other friend, Libby. So I knew that was very achievable. Yeah, the intentions were just like, hey, let's get our systems dialed so we can be consistent at climbing it in under 6 hours.
And this was a practice run or the go of the
No,
record?
this was just like a practice run. Like Josie and I don't think had climbed it any faster than 8 hours. And so we were like, okay, well, let's just see if how close can we get to 6? And of course, at the bottom that day of that morning, I did look at her and I was like, I'm going to give her this morning. Like I let her know I'm going to put my head down and try to go as fast as I can. Because I knew that, yes, along the way, we could potentially, maybe not today, but if we're going to have to do a couple laps on this, potentially we could get close to the record. And why not also try to break that along the way?
Yeah. Yeah. And I know, there's a lot to this story. You had a lot on your mind with some friends who had just got caught in an avalanche in Montana. And, your story's been documented really well through film, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and tons of interviews and tons of ways. So I don't want to have to repeat everything. But what would you say is maybe something about that day or about that moment or the immediate aftermath that you don't often get to share or don't often get to dive into? Maybe it's another layer or something you have realized in time. Is anything come to mind? I know I'm putting you right on the spot.
I know. I don't know. I guess a pervasive theme that comes up for me, and I don't have any answers, but something that comes up for me often is, when are we distracting ourselves and or just doing things habitually because we think we're supposed to? I don't know, like trying to find this fine line. It's more of like a theorizing question of just like, why are we doing what we're doing? Like, are we going for a run because we feel like we need to be skinny? Are we going for a run because everyone in our community goes for runs on that morning? Are we going for a run because we're going through a divorce and we don't want to deal with it? What is that line? I don't know. That's something that comes up often for me, is like,
Did you feel like you were doing that?
a little bit, like, and then, yeah, when are we going for a run? Just because we want to go for a gosh darn run and it feels good. Yes, because my romantic partnership at the time was not going well, and it was near the end, pretty much was the end. Then yes, Hayden and Ingy had their accident, and Josie and I were like, yeah, well, we said we'd go climb today, and she didn't sleep very well, and so we pushed back instead of leaving her house at 6 a.m, we left her house at like 8 or 9 a.m. But we still went climbing because that's what we said we were going to do. So like the habitual thing, or was it a distraction, or was it, yeah, instead of just sitting still in the meadow and appreciating that we have each other and that we just had a loss in our community.
That's a really interesting question, because I'd say, I have to put a number on it, I'd say half the shows we've done, we're almost at 1,000 episodes, like they are from some sort of life-altering situation that gave people the space or the desire to go do their trip. A lot of times it is a divorce or getting laid off or something. So is it escapism to go on adventures? I just heard a friend, this guy I recently met, and he's telling me about this trip he's getting ready to do, and it's this long paddle. And I'm like, wait, you got a full-time job and a family? Like, how are you doing that? I'm just from like a time point of view. And I'm like, oh, you're getting a divorce. It all makes sense now. And I hate to think that way, but it's still valuable, right? It's still valuable to do if you're getting away from all that. Wouldn't you say, or no?
Oh yeah. I mean, like, if that helps you, I don't know, like that's a part of the healing process also. But what's that fine line between, are we avoiding it and escaping from it, or are we using this to like find a clear headspace so we can look at it with more depth? And I guess just taking that moment of pause to figure, and I don't know that I have answers for any of that. And maybe we don't in the moment, or maybe we don't afterwards, but maybe it is just taking that moment of breath, think about, what are my intentions with this?
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode. Has that changed at all post-accident, or is it still the same questions asked with the goals you have?
It's a louder argument for other, like, for instance, just this year for my 6-year anniversary, was it my 5-year or 6-year? 6-year anniversary of falling. I got a few other hand cyclist friends to go attempt the rim to rim to rim of the Grand Canyon. And afterwards, my good friend Robbie asked me like why I do this, and I was like, I don't know anymore, because it was awesome and it was pleasant, and I didn't ever feel scared or like hanging off a cliff, like when you're rappelling over the edge of a cliff and you're just like, I don't know, I know that the rope is to the ATC and I don't know, everything's good, right? I'm going to triple check it. I didn't have any of those moments, like no over astounding fear or scared moments, but it was like other people, I think we got benighted. Other people, that pushed other people to their limits. There was a lot of communication hubbubs, and it just wasn't as beautiful, like a scenic adventure. And so why do we do this? And so I think it's an escalating conversation in my own head often. Like, why do I do these? Why do I need to do this? What good does it do?
I think that goes through every adventurer's head, usually right in the middle of it. Like, why am I out here? And usually in a place where you have no other choice but to keep going, to get out of wherever you are. So, with that immediate aftermath of this accident, once you had surgery that next week and you started to come out of the fog of the just dealing with what's going on to like, okay, what does life look like moving forward? Was it hard to talk about? Did you feel like you needed to talk about it? Like, where were you along that spectrum?
I feel like I was on the far end of the spectrum of verbal diarrhea. I had a roll of blood because yeah, it was very cathartic just to talk about my feelings and to talk about what happened and why it happened. And here, what was really also cathartic was hearing stories that you just said at the beginning of this um, podcast, like hearing those kinds of stories, like where were you? What were you doing? How did this affect you? I don't know why those were so meaningful. They were very meaningful to hear your side of the story also.
What's been one that stuck out to you? What someone else was doing during that time, or what they went through, or maybe what were you still blown away by a response by somebody?
Golly, that's a hard question.
I know.
I don't know what to think about that. What blew me away? I think just people's responses, like, I think this is where I learned how the same event how the same event affects all of us differently. And I've come around like talking to a good friend, Andy Earl, about this with other life circumstances. Like we might have gone through the same thing. You might have had a spinal cord injury or whatever it is, but the way that you cope with it, it doesn't mean that we're going to bond over our experience. Like your loss is different than my loss, and that goes to show like why I felt such a loss of community, particularly with some climbing friends or just friends in general, was because their way of coping with doesn't mean they didn't care for me or love me or weren't hurt by what happened, but their way of coping was totally different than my way of coping. And I think that was maybe one of the bigger takeaways. It's like, let's not assume that just because we've gone through the same experience, that we're actually feeling it the same way or viewing it the same way.
That's interesting. And it can be easy to misinterpret.
Yeah. Because you think that like we just went on the same hike. We just had the most joyous experience ever, probably you and I. But you're in a totally different headspace or you had a totally different experience. And we should check in on those experiences more with each other, because yeah, I think I was like, I don't know, I was the center of my own little bullseye of trauma, and so I wasn't necessarily concerned about what was happening to my friends, but they were going through their own little mini traumas too with my injury, my accident, as you saw with Adam teaching your EMT.
I'm sure it's really hard not to, it's all consuming. Something like this happens to you, like friend going through divorce right now, like that's all they can talk about, and it can be exhausting. But I understand, because I'm like, if we sometimes things just take a huge chunk of your pie for a time, and things change over time, and that you rebalance and get more perspective, but that's the time you need to be there the most to support them. You know what I mean? It's very hard, very hard. I'm sure it's a never-ending process, probably.
Yeah, it never goes away. I mean, I think that's what I don't know. Something that bothers me about, we're just like getting so philosophical. I love this. Something that has been irking me is that the grief process. Like for after a while, like people here in my small town would see me out at the community center or the pool or wherever, and be like, "Oh, the grocery store," and tell me it was so nice to see me out. I was like, "Well, I mean, like, what else am I supposed to do? Like, I'm not going to just sit in bed all day for the next, 35 years." I'm going to get out. And I don't know why we in society, I know that we just want to be positive and show the best of the best of the best of all the things. But like grief is with me all the time. Every day of this life, using a wheelchair and being discriminated against and having things in society not be accessible suck. Mm-hmm. I get so frustrated and overwhelmed. And every day is pretty amazing. I have some really lovely people in it, and I get to do cool shit that I never thought I would be doing again after my injury. So it's really like, and it's not just I'm over my grief because it was 6 years ago. No, man, this grief is with me all the time, every day.
Was there anybody that you looked up to through this process of like, all right, dealing with the new reality, basically? Mm-hmm. Was there anybody that, because I'm sure, you start looking for those stories, you started, connecting with similar communities and whatnot. Was there anybody that's like, that's someone doing it the right way that I want to emulate? Or maybe they were dealing with a similar thing, maybe not. Maybe they were dealing with a different type of challenge.
A lot of people reached out to me, and this is where social media was lovely in this way. Like people I didn't know, but they started DMing me on social media. Like Jim Harris has become a really good friend of mine, and he was paralyzed years before I was, but was out there doing cool shit. And also just as a good resource for me of like, hey, my body's doing this. How did you deal with that?
Mm-hmm.
And Tom Hornbein, who was a good friend here, he just passed. He's the first, they climbed the west ridge of Mount Everest way back in the day. He just passed at the age of 92 or 93. His good friend, Barry Corbett, was paralyzed and had a book called Options. And so he passed me that book. So a lot of people gave me some good resources and like Mark Wellman, for instance, like the first paralyzed dude to climb El Cap. Like I had a lot of good mentors, I suppose, out there to look at, like people. And I think that's where my brain in the hospital is like so disappointed with this life, like handed this wheelchair. Like I have said it before, like you're handed all this stuff or told all these things, but it's all from like 1970s. And the research for spinal cord injury hasn't gotten anywhere. Like, are you kidding me? We have things for AIDS and cancer and MS. Like we've come so far with a lot of science, but for some reason, certain science disabilities, we're like, nope, unfixable. We shouldn't even look at it. It's hopeless. And so I think that's where my brain just was like, no, we got to do cool shit. There's people out there doing cool shit. And there's tons of people out there doing rad stuff, disability included.
What was easier than you expected to deal with in this new reality?
Oh my God, what was easier than expected?
Anything at all? This episode is brought to us by Oris watches. You know, a piece of equipment on any adventure that I'm honestly surprised by how much I use is my watch. And I'm wearing a watch right now. I always have a watch on. And I believe that you should check out Oris watches. Oris is a 119-year-old family-owned independent watch brand based out of Hallstein, Switzerland. The brand has been certified climate and carbon neutral since 2021, and every year releases a sustainability report. Oris only makes mechanical watches like the new Pro Pilot X Caliber 400 and the new Pro Pilot Altimeter featuring a 3D printed carbon case. If you're a fan of mechanical watches like I am, there's nothing in the game that's better than Oris, and you can discover the full Oris collection at a retailer near you or at oris.ch. So if you want that one piece of equipment in your life to be functional, to be useful, to be beautiful, artistic, check out Oris watches. Oris, go your own way. As y'all know, podcasting is not what I do full time. My day job, we use Shopify. And we're one of the fastest growing companies in the country, and we trust Shopify with what we do. It is so easy to use. It is so easy to set up because Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business, whether you're a startup or a mature company. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real life store stage, all the way to did we just hit 1 million orders stage, Shopify is there to help you grow. And I have experienced Shopify at all those stages. They even have in-person POS systems when you're ready for brick and mortar. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, up to 36% better compared to other leading commerce platforms. And what I like about it, it's a one-time solution. You don't have to use it now and then switch to something once you get bigger. They will grow with you, and they have folks to help you all along the way of that growth. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ASP, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ASP now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/ASP. So we recently had the first blind U.S. veteran who to climb Everest on the show, Lonnie Bedwell.
Mm-hmm.
He's kayaked the Grand Canyon. I mean, the dude is just a wonderful human. You can just tell.
Yeah.
But what I was blown away by was he raised 3 daughters as a single dad and blind. And I'm like, in small town Indiana, I'm like, how did you do that? Like, that seems way harder than climbing Everest because that's, 18 years or 20 years and you're by yourself. And I'm like, he said just like dealing with normal life was a lot easier than he expected. The more difficult thing was like losing independence, is what he said. But anyway, it was interesting to ask him that. I wanted to ask you that too.
No, and I feel lucky in that my answer, just listening to you talk about that story, was going to say something about my work, having found passion in my work, but which is very unusual for people with disabilities. Like returning to work is a whole conundrum, like financially, like you have these financial caps and barriers, and you can only earn X amount of money on Social Security, all that kind of stuff. But I feel really lucky in that a gentleman who works for the National Park Service found me and was like, and pretty much cultivated a job for me back with the National Park Service. And so to find that joy and purpose again was, I feel so incredibly fortunate, and that I am now I'm very passionate about my work and it's going places and it's doing good. That feels like way easier than expected, I suppose, for that to fall into my lap.
Do you feel like this new sense of purpose that you just couldn't have had before, just from a place of not really truly understanding in your work, that is, specifically?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I was playing outside and being in the wilderness before, but I didn't really have any empathy or compassion for people with disability. I didn't have a lens for people with disabilities and their desire to recreate in wilderness and push themselves the way I was pushing myself prior to my injury. And now I do.
Yeah, and that's with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, correct?
I just left. Yes, so I was with the National Park Service and Fish and Wildlife, and I just left. So I branched out. My buddy Joe Stone and I are doing a consulting, like trail consulting, and yeah, so we're hoping that branches out. And then I've also started a development director job with Unite to Fight Paralysis, so working on spinal cord research directly.
Oh, wow. That is fantastic. Well, can I ask you about the Tour Divide? That's extremely intriguing, because when I first saw you were doing that, I was, one, blown away. And that was probably the biggest thing that I wanted to like reach out about. I've done the Tour Divide. It was really freaking hard, to say to say the least. How did you do that? Was that a desire or a dream before your injury, or did that come about afterwards?
It was like a little bit of a whisper, I guess, before my injury. My really good friend Justin had gotten into bike packing and bike racing stuff. Maybe that he was a good climbing buddy over the last like 20 years, and in the last maybe 2 or 3 before my injury, he did the Arizona, the Colorado, and the Tour Divide in a year. He did a little podcast called The Desolationist for a while. There are some good episodes. But anyway, he was like, I don't know, because he was a climbing buddy, and then we'd go biking every once in a while. And because again, when I moved to Colorado initially, I was more into mountain biking because that was easier access in Minnesota. So I was like always I guess, a small whisper in the back of my head. But then after I was injured, I asked him, like, do you think that would be possible? Like, it's mostly Forest Service roads, isn't it? Like, so I bought the maps and looked up, and it was like 62 miles of single track or something. And like, all right, I think this seems doable.
What did you do with the single track?
In Canada, in the Canada portion, we did the road instead of because I extended it. We didn't go from Banff, we went from Jasper. So from the very first day out of Jasper, 2 things happened. Like, one, the single track was closed because of elk rutting or something.
Oh, interesting.
Elk closures, but that worked out like doubly. Like, okay, it's closed A for that, but also I didn't really fit, and it was super. It would have fit okay, but it would have been really time consuming because when it's side hilly, like the camber from left to right, when the trail has a lot of camber, then it's just really slow moving for me. So that portion I omitted, but in the US, I honestly only recall like 5 legitimate miles of single track. And the tightest part was in the Bob Marshall Wilderness there, where it was a double track road, but like half of it had eroded away. So now it's a single track with like snowy rubble.
So you did the ice-filled parkway from Jasper to Banff?
Yes.
Like the road?
Yep.
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful.
Oh my God, the whole community portion. I was like, I want to do that whole second. I want to do the whole thing again. Like, it's so amazing.
And you did it in 25 days. That's pretty dang good time.
From the Canadian, because that was the first go. So the first go was in COVID year, so the Canada border wasn't open. So from the Canada border to the Mexico border was 25 days, which was like 100-mile average.
Yeah, that's pretty dang good. Talk to us about because you were biking with your legs before. Talk to us about some of the differences of hand cycling. Like, is it twice as hard? Is it a third as hard? Is it 5 times harder? Like, that's a lot less just muscle mass to use. Like, tell us kind of those differences and some of those challenges. Put that into perspective.
Well, I joked with my bike partner that I was cheating because I'm e-assisted. My hand cycle, so I have a few different hand cycles, but the one I prefer, I'm in a kneeling position, so I'm leaning forward. My chest is on the seat, essentially my seat.
Mm-hmm.
So I get saddle sore in between the boobs. And my neck is definitely, I mean, 100 miles a day of like craning it up because I'm like leaning forward on like regular mountain bike handlebars, but my neck is always up. And so that part, like the crick in my neck after like 30 miles some days was like, okay, well, we've got 80 more miles to go. Knife stabbing me in my neck. Those things were hard, but yeah, my biceps and my triceps are way smaller than my quads and my hamstrings. So I have an e-assist motor, which then just like helps my cadence so I can at least keep up with Joe, like on the front. And I changed my cog ratio. So specifically for that, like what came manufactured on the bike versus what I put on it. So because I wanted on the flats, I knew Joe was going to go like 20 to 24 miles an hour on pavement. And so I was like, well, I want to be able to keep up with him. So
Yeah.
I have to change my ratio there a little bit, but doesn't that like for the physically, because of the e-assist, my arms weren't nearly as tired as probably Joe was putting as much. And like, yeah, I can't like this muscle mass can't exert as much. Like my heart rate was probably 150 most of the day, whereas his was 170.
Right. Well, I even for folks I remember the neck fatigue was a big problem. There was one guy I was riding with. He like couldn't hold his head up. And I'm like, because everyone's injuries are like I feel like my hands were gonna go numb like constantly. I was like that was one thing in my forearms, but everyone's different. This guy he got a Gatorade bottle from a gas station and taped it under his chin to hold his head up.
Dude, that's the thing. Like, there's a syndrome or something that's
Yeah.
called after that.
I was like, holy cow, like everyone's different, but you even more so because you were like leaned forward and had to lift it up
Mhm.
even more. Take us through, if there was one, maybe your favorite memory from the Tour Divide, because I think that's just such a huge achievement.
It's hard to pick just one, man. I would still say, like, riding through the Gila Wilderness in New Mexico was just mind blowing. Like, what a cool scenery that I didn't fathom. I didn't even know. And I was just blown away, and the lack of people. And I don't know, it was just so beautiful.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode. So once you did the Tour Divide, what was the feeling? Was it the feeling of like, I can do hard things still? I can achieve anything? Was it like, what's next? Or, did you feel like you got what you were looking for?
I think for me, so I did it, the Canada portion, I think was 3 or 4 years after my injury. And it was definitely my biggest endeavor after my injury and the most like quintessential type endeavor to what I was doing before. Long days, all day, every day, back to back to back. And for me, it was a moment of healing, like that this wheelchair doesn't define who I am as much as I think it does. Like I'm in my own head about it a lot, and it creates a lot of own anxiety for me. Like just wheeling downtown in a city, I get embarrassed when I'm by myself. Like I think everyone's looking at me and thinking I'm the wheelchair girl. And so just, I guess, not having the time to care about those thoughts because I'm busy doing something else. I'm busy biking across the country. Helped quelch some of those awful thoughts that I have in my head all the time.
What was it like to film this experience? I know with the movie that came out, Accidental Life, was that difficult to have that all captured, or did you feel like it needed to be told, kind of like talking about it? That was a very natural response, wanting to share.
I wasn't very cognizant. I would say in the first year or two, it sounds silly as I'm being followed around by, it's just a single woman and her handheld camera most of the time. I wasn't I think I was so busy in my own head with my trauma and my healing that and I really honestly didn't think it would go anywhere. Like I don't know. I just was like, okay, this will be like a 20-minute video somewhere. I don't know, or nothing. And I was just so busy in my own healing process that I really wasn't cognizant, or I guess maybe I was naive to the what I was saying on camera or what I was doing. I wasn't really cognizant of that stuff. Yeah, and we finally, her and I finally had a conversation of like what I would like it to convey. I wanted it to be, because I was so disappointed in my experiences, the initial days of spinal cord injury and the lack of progress and the discrimination side. I wanted it to be true to, hey, spinal cord injury is, yes, my legs aren't moving, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff like bathroom, bowel, peeing, nerve pain, all this stuff that you don't see that people deal with on the day-to-day basis. And while the movie didn't quite show that in the way that I wanted, I've been getting good, I guess, reviews about it.
I've heard you compare it to like an iceberg. You know, the
Yeah.
10% that's visible is what you see when you're out in the street, you know, not the physical street, but, you know, out on the town. But that 90% that you don't see is all the stuff that, you know, you wouldn't think about unless you're going through it yourself or someone close to you is.
Yeah, or just hanging out with me for a day and just realizing like, oh my God, how many people approach you at the grocery store and say, God bless you? And yeah, you know, just all the little things that you don't see, right? The 90% that you don't see that happens to people in communities that we're not familiar with on a day-to-day basis.
What do you think this has taught you? Has it helped you see other things more clearly? Like maybe I don't understand the depth of this kind of situation or these kind of scenarios, or I don't know. What are some of those like secondary or even tertiary lessons that or perspectives you've gained?
Um, I'm still working on this one, but probably the biggest one, as before my injury, I always perceived myself as, if I ask more than once, then I'm an annoyance or I'm a burden. And so becoming a person with a disability, it already inherently feels like I'm a burden on society or on everyone. And so I think the biggest lesson that I'm learning is that I have needs and that they matter.
Mm-hmm.
To speak up for those needs is okay. And I should be. And with that, to be curious about others people's needs. If I'm not, like, it's this injury has, I think I'm more inquisitive than I was before.
What do you think? I mean, you ever think about like the direction you were going or the trajectory your life was on beforehand and how different that would be from now? Like, is it better? Is it worse? Is it just different? Do you ever think about that?
I do all the time, like, especially when it comes to work, right? Like, I was going to go back to nursing school. I didn't really know what I was doing. I keep getting degrees. Why do I do that? And I don't use them. Like, where would I be? And relationships, I think about that all the time, like friendships and romantic wise. Like, where would I be? Maybe I'd be in another relationship where it's not great because I haven't been speaking for my needs, or I didn't realize that it's okay to speak up for my needs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think about it all the time. But it doesn't really go very far because you're just like, well, this is where we are now.
Who knows?
So,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, let's do the best we can with what we got, where we are.
So, you know, the Tour Divide is huge, huge, huge achievement and such a long journey. Are there, I don't know, any other similar journeys that you could see yourself taking? Or does it, a lot of times when you're out on one of those trips, you know, it's like a through hike, you know, oh, I'm halfway through the AT. Well, now I want to do the PCT or the CDT. And it just kind of spurs in a desire for more. Did you feel like the Tour Divide has done that for you? Like, are there other long distance trails you want to do?
Absolutely, never, not enough. I know. I'm like, there's some things in New Zealand I want to do. I want to try to piecemeal some sort of like sea kayaking, boat biking thing, like in Croatia or something. My friend just messaged me today about doing the Peru Divide, which I haven't even looked into. But of course, I was like, yes, absolutely. When do you want to do it? So we'll see.
What is it? You know, how does that work with work and all that? I mean, are you still able to just take the time?
I am. I request, like, every job I've taken since my injury, I've requested 2 to 4 weeks of unpaid leave in addition to my like regular time off, just because I know me and my mental health and wanting to play. that I will probably absorb all of those 4 weeks of unpaid leave in addition to my other stuff. But I also work remotely, so I can be wherever and work in the evenings if I need to, or weekends or whatever.
That's cool that you asked that, because that's might not ask that otherwise,
No, well, part of it was like, well, I don't know what this body's going to do. What if I need, and like, I know we get medical leave, but I don't know. I just knew that like, I'm not like 2 weeks off a year.
It's crazy, and it's so hard to even do like all together. You know what I mean? It's like you don't want to use it all up, so it's like you space it out, but then that's not enough of a break, and it's just kind of wild that we're all, we all accept this. But what's been one of your, I don't know, most rewarding recent adventures?
Well, it was one of the most rewarding. Well, right, we just did the Grand Canyon, which was, yes, why am I doing this? I don't know, but also really rewarding. Rewarding in the fact for me, it's the like my advocacy for teaching about what we are capable of on hand cycles and what the definition of a wheelchair is, and teaching our public lands managers essentially that like there's all this cool new technology out there, and we are very capable of going hiking, and these are our legs for hiking. Yes, they look like bicycles, but like a wheelchair is like they all have wheels, and these are different modes of transportation. Like my everyday wheelchairs, my flip flops, and my hand cycles, my hiking boots, and that, I don't know, that's the analogy I've been making, and I guess that's something to me that I'm super jazzed about right now, like this consulting stuff that Joe and I are doing, and keep pushing the envelope of understanding and that stigma that people have against people with disabilities, and that our hand cycles are bikes, for instance.
So take us through where we are with that, like kind of generally, and where you want us to be, because here in Florida, funny enough, we have a really solid state park system, and I feel one of the major messages they're constantly pushing and talking about is how adaptive, capable, and ready a lot of the state parks are. And that's just like, I'd say one of the main pillars they talk about. And like, hey, all these parks, 175 national or state parks, all of them have lots of accessibility. So like, don't let that stop you. And I just think that's like, I don't know, I didn't see that anywhere before. Where are we now, and where are you trying to get us to?
Well, I think what I'm mostly trying to do is like recognize, like, yes, doing, like, for instance, doing the Grand Canyon, the rim to rim, that's one end of the spectrum. And yes, we have these designated, set aside, accessible trails on our national parks and our public lands, for instance. But it's a spectrum of opportunity, right? Like, I don't want just the 1 mile paved trail in the busiest parts of our national parks. And not everyone wants to go try the rim to rim on their hand cycle either, but there's a huge spectrum of opportunity in between. And so it doesn't need to be paved. So I guess my push and like my consulting work is teaching people that we have a law out there about measuring our trails. We are supposed to, trail sign information is supposed to have 5 things: from the length of the trail, the running slope, the cross slope, the width of it, and that we're not providing this information. And let's get up to speed and start measuring our trails and provide that information, because then the users can decide what trail works for them, rather than us labeling it like, hey, you with the, oh, like whenever I go to anywhere, people see me in the wheelchair and like, oh, we got to give her the accessible features. Like, yes, those are nice, especially in the front country, like to get into the post office. Yes, I definitely need a ramp to get in. But as far as adventure experiences goes, I don't want the paved trail. I want to choose, given if I have information about the trail, I can choose what works better for me, and how many friends do I need along, or maybe I can do it solo, that kind of stuff.
Is there progress being made?
Yeah. Like my work with the national parks, there's been like 4 or 5 or 6 national parks who got on board and who are doing, not only was I getting them to start measuring their trails and conveying that information online, but working with local adaptive communities. And so they're doing like adaptive hikes, adaptive program days, like really cool stuff. So it's slowly making progress, and it's cool to see. Yeah, it's cool to see.
Have you heard any stories from anybody that has given you feedback on that? Maybe, someone that wasn't able to access a park before. I'm sure there's a lot of folks that are very intimidated by the idea, that might be in wheelchairs, where it's like, I don't know if I can do that. But maybe once you let them know there's a trail, and also help get out for the first time. Have you heard any stories about that and any feedback?
I guess not firsthand from people saying that they've like now been able to enjoy. I mean, I know that there's out there, like I've seen little articles and Instagram posts of people like now being able to go places and do cool things. I mostly, unfortunately, and maybe fortunately, I've been getting a lot of phone calls. Like just before this, I got a phone call from a friend in Telluride, Colorado about how they're dealing with the Forest Service and the hand cycles aren't allowed on Forest Service because they're considered motorized vehicles. So I get a lot of like, hey Quinn, how we're struggling with this entity. How can we tell them that we want to recreate there and it's not a motorized, like my hand cycle, yes, it has a battery and it's e-assisted, but it's not an ATV by any means.
Right. I still run into parks that don't allow inflatable vessels because they are thinking of like super cheap river rafts that are, from Walmart for $10 and they pop like crazy and they're, it's like a highly protected spring. I'm like, this is an inflatable paddleboard that can like withstand. I mean, what are whitewater rafts made out of? They're inflatable.
Yeah.
Those are in that. So there is like a lapse in a delay in education with just the quickness technologies coming out with really innovative ideas to make things accessible.
Yeah, or contextualizing that information. Like, yes, we have these rules written on a piece of paper. Like we have a definition of a wheelchair in wilderness. But for me, what I've been educating also is like, well, why was that definition created? Well, it was the definition was created in context of wilderness. And wilderness has certain qualities, like it should be untrammeled, it should be quiet. We should try to do our best. Like ATVs shouldn't be allowed. But a battery-powered wheelchair is in the definition that a manually or battery-powered is okay. So like, why are you denying us just because it looks different, I suppose, or right, like you said with the paddleboard, like why are you denying it when you really haven't thought about like
why is that rule in place?
Yeah,
it's to prevent litter. Well, this isn't going to be or whatever reason prevent having to rescue people whose tubes pop halfway down this stretch of wilderness river. So yeah, it's more like the letter of the law versus the spirit of what it was written for. And I'm sure that takes lots of work, I'm sure, to get that across to people. You'll probably have a never-ending job.
I know, it's funny when I got the national park job. In fact, I was like, man, so I'm gonna like update the website and I'm gonna do this and this. Like, what am I gonna do after 2 or 3 years? And now I'm like, oh my God, it's never ending.
This is gonna be a lifelong mission. That's exciting. Well, what gives you hope about the work you do, and what excites you the most about what's on the horizon for you?
Well, so I have both my 2 new jobs. So Unite to Fight Paralysis. What excites me is that we've finally gotten into human clinical trials with people with spinal cord injury. Like we're actually seeing tangible recovery of function, like people able to grab things, people able to stand up who weren't able to do that before. So just those little visuals, I think, are really helpful in forwarding the science and forwarding the funding and the fact that it's not a hopeless cause. So I'm really excited about that.
That's really cool. That's exciting. Well, how about adventure-wise? What are you most excited about coming up?
Well, it's getting to be winter, and 2 years ago, I wasn't excited about down skiing, but this winter I am.
Well, Quinn, is there anything else you'd like to share with the Adventure Sports Podcast community?
I would just encourage anybody, like if there's somebody in a disability in your life that you know or that you see from time to time, like ask them to go do something. We're often a community that's like not invited. So just invite us.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to growing the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.